Wheel rotation in early Iron Age and Archaic Naxian coarse-wares, their context and evolution. In this paper, I will discuss the Naxian potter's role in the early Iron Age and Archaic period by focusing on a rather neglected phenomenon in scholarship, the use of wheel rotation on geometric and archaic coarse-wares on the island of Naxos in the Cyclades, and how this phenomenon can be linked to intra- and inter-island connectivity in the Aegean. I combine data from my previous researches on Naxos with my current postdoctoral research at Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. On a wider canvas, my postdoctoral research focuses on pottery production and consumption, potter's mobility and human dynamics between mother cities, colonial establishments, and the native milieu in Greece and in southern Italy. It combines macroscopic approaches, literature study of ethnoarchaeological research, archaeometric analysis, as well as geological investigation of settlement areas and their vicinity, and experimental reconstructions. It is part of the multidisciplinary project What Went into the Melting Pot, Land Use, Agriculture, and Craft Production as indicators for the contributions of Greek migrants and local inhabitants to the so-called Greek colonization in Italy. This project aims to make a contribution to the debate on the mixed versus exclusively Greek character of the colonial milieu by combining new theoretical insights, scientific analysis of ancient craft products, a transdisciplinary synergy of bioarchaeology and landscape modeling, and international scholarly collaboration. Early Iron Age Naxos, which participated in the Greek migration movement to southern Italy, Naxos and Euboea were partners in the foundation of Sicilian Naxos in 734 BC, had a key role in cultural transmission, first of all in the Aegean, as gradually becomes evident from its fineware and coarse-ware traditions. Alongside fine pottery, Naxos had robust early Iron Age coarse hand-building potting traditions. This is mainly known by way of extrapolation, as this data thus far comes primarily from its cemeteries. Geometric coarse handmade pots, such as Naxian jars with a tripod foot or plain base, have been discovered at the harbour town of Naxos, at the Plithos burial ground and in the South Cemetery, as well as in inland Naxos in the necropolis of Tsikalario and in Agios Ioannis near Apeiranthos. Such vessels, in the context of the cemetery, may have been used as enchitrismi or as urns. Two items from this class of pottery are among the earliest examples of figular imagery of geometric Cycladic pottery known thus far. The first use of such pots, as I have argued elsewhere, was in the household to make and/or store foodstuffs, as is evident from their shape and capacity. In the inland cemetery of Tsikalario, a significant number of 8th century BC circular and ellipsoid funerary structures, low tumuli, have been uncovered. More sporadic burial structures and offerings were located in the area of the necropolis at least until the end of the Archaic period. The low grave tumuli discovered in the Tsikalario cemetery comprise a mortuary phenomenon not found elsewhere on Naxos during the early Iron Age. It possibly represents an attempt by the kinship groups that buried the deceased in the cemetery to articulate status and identity. This necropolis, where one can find a range of fine and coarse vases and techniques, remains the best case study on Naxos for the display of intra-site variation in morphology and primary and secondary rough-outs for a range of forms for cooking, food processing, transportation, and storage. The earliest evidence of wheel rotation on coarse-wares is here observed. When can the phenomenon of wheel rotation on coarse-wares first be noticed at the cemetery of Tsikalario? We first observe this in the context of Low Tumulus 6, whose interior was used during the Middle Geometric II, Late Geometric I periods. Within the tumulus, in addition to fine drinking and pouring vessels, a minimum of 8 Naxian storage pots of fine semi-fine ware and coarse-ware were uncovered. Comparisons with other contexts from Tsikalario and the function of the storage vessels in these locations supports the supposition that these pots were used for burials and that this tumulus was a collective funerary structure. All fine wares from the interior of this tumulus are wheel-made, and all coarse wares are hand-made, except for one coarse pot discovered together with other vessels in the most central part of the tumulus. This central, oval-shaped part of the structure included 3 storage vessels in an upright position: a fine semi-fine archaizing wheel-made transport and storage amphora proto-geometric in style, in the interior of which a small coarse, burnished, hand-made cooking jug was found, a coarse hand-made handless jar, and the coarse amphora Museum of Naxos 3825, inside which a fine wheel-made kiathos was placed. This latter amphora, of Naxian fabric, is a rather narrow-bodied vessel with handles embellished with horn-like terminals. The way it was manufactured contrasts with that of other coarse hand-made vessels from the interior of the structure. One of the most significant features of this amphora is that it was formed through the use of rotative kinetic energy. As Valentin Roux and Marie-Agnès Curti have demonstrated, Archaic can be undertaken at different stages of the forming process. At its most basic, it is used in pots which are made by coiling and then thinned or smoothed on the potter's wheel, whilst at its most advanced, a coil is added and thrown. In the interior of this storage amphora, one can observe wheel rilling from the lower part to the rim, whereas the exterior is smoothed. It is possible that the potter who made this vessel opened out the clay lamp with the assistance of wheel rotation, while its walls were built up with coils and then shaped on the wheel. The milled geometric 2 kiathos discovered in its interior and its other confines from inside the tumulus provide a rough date for this amphora ranging from the milled geometric 2 to late geometric 1, meaning no later than the 3rd quarter of the 8th century BC. Comparisons can be made with another well-documented site in the Cyclades, the settlement of Zagora on Andros, where this technique has been identified by Beatrice McLaughlin in the last quarter of the 8th century BC. Thus, its appearance on Naxos occurs at an early stage of this practice. The exterior periphery of Low Tumulus 6, as in some other cases at the exterior of the Tsikalario low tumuli, seems to have been used from the Middle Geometric 2, Late Geometric 1 onwards through the Archaic period, serving to link the first generation of the dead with the later ones. Coarse storage jars and amphorae and cooking jugs may have been used there for enchitrismi and/or funerary rituals, as is the case for the chytre found within enclosure 2. Pots from the periphery of the tumulus that can be dated probably to the Middle Geometric and Late Geometric 1 periods include a hand-made tripod jar with incised decoration and a hand-made handless jar. More significant for our discussion is another coarse storage amphora, Museum of Naxos 3800, of the same shape and technique, made with the use of rotative kinetic energy. As was the coarse amphora Museum of Naxos 3825 from the center of this structure. Based on the shapes and techniques used for the coarse-wares in the context of the cemetery, what I observe are 2 chronological phases. In the first phase, from the first half to the 3rd quarter of the 8th century BC, which roughly coincides with the period of use of the interior of most of the low tumuli at Tsikalario and the beginning of the use of their exterior perimeters, hand-made potting traditions prevail and the predominant coarse shapes are hand-made jars and amphorae, which also share some similarities in form. This first phase gradually comes to an end approximately when RKE is used for the manufacture of the 2 coarse amphorae from Low Tumulus 6. During the second phase, mainly from the last quarter of the 8th century BC to the Archaic period, when the periphery of some low tumuli continues to be used and other more irregular funerary stone structures or enclosures are built within the necropolis, there is a change in the use of shapes, with the prevalence now of cooking pots, especially cooking jugs, which show a diversity of primary and secondary rough-outs. These cooking jugs show varying levels of wheel rotation. Some were made by coiling and then thinned or smoothed using a turntable. For others, the potters would have opened out the clay lamp with the assistance of wheel rotation, Thereafter, the walls were built up with coils and shaped on the wheel, as in the case of the Amphorae Museum of Naxos 3825 and 3800. An important parameter for this early adoption of rotational devices on Naxos may have been that Naxian potters had access to clay suitable for wheel throwing. Thanks to macroscopic observations by modern potters on Naxos about the ability of Naxian clays used not to collapse or crack while wheel coiling or wheel throwing, alongside our archaeometric analysis of the fabric profiles of local, fine, semi-fine and coarse pottery, we begin to understand the qualities of Naxian clays and the prospects for identifying the potential sources and the processes followed by the potters in preparation of the clay bodies suitable for the vessel types they were making. Petrographic and wavelength dispersive X-ray fluorescence analysis we have conducted with Vangelia Kyriadzi and Noemi Muller at the Fitch Laboratory of the British School at Athens on fine and coarse wares from the Tsikalario cemetery and the Plithos burial ground indicate regarding the coarse wares a main fabric group used for the majority of the analyzed Naxian handmade storage jars. This fabric is to be associated with the dominant granite-granodiorite intrusion in the western region of Naxos, where Naxos town is located. Within this group, variation reflects some heterogeneity in the sourcing of raw materials, but this is not the only fabric used for the manufacture of handmade jars. Petrographic and elemental analysis of the Naxian handmade jar from Tsikalario Museum of Naxos 3839 indicate a distinctly different fabric characterized by schist and polycrystalline quartz rock fragments. It is a low calcareous clay with higher chromium, nickel and magnesium concentrations, quite unlike other analyzed Naxian coarse jars. This fabric is compatible with the local geology of central and eastern Naxos. The Tsikalario cemetery is situated in the central part. These findings imply the existence of pottery workshops in different parts of the island, with some products of the main fabric group of jars from the western part reaching inland Tsikalario. Either the latter jars were traded, exchanged, or people brought them when they moved to the interior. Equally important is the fact that 3 samples of storage amphorae from Low Tumulus 6 at Tsikalario have fabrics characterized by polycrystalline rock fragments, but they are distinctly different petrographically and chemically from the jar 3839. Among them is the amphora 3800, which together with amphora 3825 provided the earliest preserved evidence of the use of RKE on early Iron Age Naxos to date. More storage amphorae as well as cooking jugs from Tsikalario will be analyzed petrographically and chemically, but it is interesting to note that thus far as it seems, wheel coiling for the manufacture of the amphora 3800 was practiced using the same or similar clays that were used for the making of handmade storage amphorae from Tsikalario. The study of pottery manufacturing behaviors allows for a more detailed understanding of social dynamics. The process by which a potter's wheel was incorporated into the existing hat-making coarse-ware potting tradition on Naxos is among the research questions I'm currently investigating. As I mentioned above, the earliest evidence of wheel coiling on early Iron Age Naxos so far known dates from around the middle or third quarter of the 8th century BC onwards. What we are witnessing is a possible transformation of hand-built techniques during these years, when handmade techniques still continue to be used, but tournettes were also gradually introduced for various stages of the manufacturing process, as the material from Tsikalario indicates. Preliminary results on the variability of fabrics, as well as the macroscopic observations on the variety of forming and finishing techniques at the cemetery of Tsikalario, may indicate that several communities on the island were active in pottery manufacture. Did the impetus for change and innovation in pottery craftsmanship involving the appearance of wheel-coiled vessels come from cross-tradition transmission on Naxos, especially if we consider there was a significant body of potters who were working with wheels to make fine wares? Interactions between fine and coarse-ware production is clearly demonstrated by some fine-ware examples on Naxos. One from Tsikalario concerns a Naxian milled geometric fine semi-fine closed vessel with a tripod base. The shape of its foot seems to have been influenced by the form of the Naxian coarse tripod jar. The connectivity we observe among potters, especially in 8th century Naxos, fits well with other patterns of interconnectivity evident on the island in the 8th century, as for example in the denser occupation patterns which offer evidence for demographic growth and networks of sanctuaries in coastal and inland regions of the island. Interactions among potters seem to have transcended potted communities within the island and may have reached other Cycladic communities. Apart from Naxos, wheel rotation on coarse-wares has been documented by McLaughlin on Andros at the geometric settlement of Zagora as mentioned above among the pottery used by the occupants of the Zagora houses during the last quarter of the 8th century BC. First comparisons of the two traditions, Naxian and Andriot, which are unquestionably independent, indicate that wheel shaping became an integral part of the Naxian tradition from at least the middle or the third quarter of the 8th century BC onwards, whereas the Andriot tradition is grounded in the drawing technique with the incorporation of wheel shaping into existing practices only at the end of the early Iron Age. Since the Zagora potters had achieved the same for a restricted shape range in the last decades of the 8th century, the incorporation of wheel use into the existing Zagora tradition raises the question whether there was knowledge transmission between Cycladic communities from Naxos to Andros. To tackle this matter, McLaughlin and I are establishing comparable material correlates to differentiate the two island potting traditions and identify sufficient evidence to postulate transmission. Intra- and inter-island knowledge transmission among communities of practice can be explored through the lens of ethnoarchaeology. The techniques of traditional potters of early modern Cyprus offer tangible parallels for potential ways our ceramic wares from Iron Age Naxos and Andros were manufactured. In our case, McLaughlin and I, to explore how Iron Age potters shared practice, we are collaborating with ethnoarchaeologist Dr. Gloria London. Her research constitutes one of the rare long-term regional studies of modern potting traditions in the Mediterranean. London first recorded Cypriot female potters in 1986 when she lived full-time with potters in Kornos and Agios Dimitrios, showcasing there the vital role of female potters. Her thorough documentation displays the performative interplay of the potter's actions, the clay medium, the tools they use to shape it, the exchange of motor skills, visits between potting communities based on kinship ties and teacher-apprenticeship networks, the movement of practitioners as a result of marriage. All of the above are valuable for our archaeological research. It highlights the work of female potters, a field of ethnoarchaeological and archaeological research which is gradually gaining favor in various parts of the world, offering us significant insights on the gender and social identity of ancient potters. London also showed that the Troodos female potters utilized the turntable to shape medium-sized and larger vessels, offering ethnographic parallels for the use of the turntable in rough-outs and shaping to varying degrees, both for Iron Age Naxos and Andros. In closing this paper, I would like to stress that it is only with bottom-up interdisciplinary pottery studies of both fine and coarse-ware potting traditions that we will be able to understand the technological knowledge and transmission at a regional level, and then move forward to identify cultural transmission across multiple contact zones. Thank you very much.